Welcome to the Good Reading Podcast, proudly sponsored by Book People Gift Cards. A Book People gift card is the perfect gift for readers of all ages. Simply order your gift card online at bookpeoplegiftcards.org.au. Redeem at any one of over 500 bookshops across Australia. Visit bookpeoplegiftcards.org.au.
Will stepped from a white-hot dazzle of sunlight into the shadowed lane between two long high brick walls. The sudden coolness made him dizzy. He squatted and put his head between his knees, wondering if something had gone wrong with the weather metrics. As his eyes adjusted to the shade, he noticed dense moss growing in the cracks of the broken pavement. He touched it with his forefinger. It was soft and cool, like a green pelt. Somehow the waistco workers, whose job it was to repair paths and spray for weeds, had missed this shaggy little sliver of the suburb. Originally, the area had been industrial land, Das said, but it had been rezoned as residential when refugees from the drowning coastal cities began to move inland. Will loved all the contrasting bits of Fyshwick, but what he liked best were the industrial areas, where you might find a garden of weeds inside a half shell of brick, golden beams of sunlight slanting down through the dusty windows of a vacant warehouse, or a narrow lane where moss grew unchecked through broken cement. He only wished there was graffiti. If he had any guts, he would do some. He glanced up warily at the lane of perfect blue sky overhead, though he had done nothing wrong. Not that you could see a watch drone, even if one was right above. The chance of a drone happening to be overhead, just as he was cutting through the lane, seemed unlikely, but you never knew. Someone is always watching.
Isobelle Carmody is one of Australia's most highly acclaimed authors of fantasy fiction. At 14, she began Newton, the first book in her much-loved Newton Chronicles. Since then, her books have included her novel The Gathering, which won the 1993 Children's Literature Peace Prize. Greylands won the 1997 Aurealis Award for Excellence in Speculative Fiction. Isobelle's work for younger readers includes her two series The Legend of Little Fur and The Kingdom of the Lost. She has also written several picture books, as well as collections of short stories for children, young adults, and adults. Today, I'm talking to Isobelle Carmody about her new novel, Comes the Night. Isobelle, welcome to the Good Reading Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
The initial setting for Comes the Night is a Canberra dome. Not the Canberra bubble that we might be familiar with, but rather a complex that protects its inhabitants from the corrosive atmosphere outside. What's life like under the Canberra dome, and how did it come about?
It's pretty safe and pretty comfortable, kind of the end result of what I would imagine if we choose safety over just about everything else. I think the end result would be very controlled. It came about because I was writer-in-residence in Canberra a few years ago, and they sort of gave me the keys to the city. So I saw a lot of things normal people don't see. And I've always been fascinated by what goes on behind the scenes in just about everything. What are the mechanizations of society that happen behind the things that we see? They gave me, for instance, permission to go down to the bottom of the National Library, where I saw, wearing white gloves, I was allowed to hold Marion Mahoney Griffin's silk map of Canberra, the original plan when they won that competition to design a city. It's exquisite. It's really, really beautiful. And I'm sure part of the reason it won simply because it was so beautiful. All sorts of things go into that amoebic soup up there that you don't know when you're going to use them. But that was certainly something that struck me. Both the secrecy of and the permission to hold it and the protectedness of it. And that city itself is a design city. So there's an attempt to control a city where cities normally grow. You know, it's a discourse between you and your spaces that you live in. You alter them, but they also shape how you live within them. So it's this constant exchange. But a planned city tries to guess what the inhabitants are going to do and also tries to control the inhabitants to some extent for sometimes very benevolent reasons. But it's that attitude. So I was very conscious of these things, of the strangeness of Canberra. But they also had these ideas that if you built in the physical realm in the right way with the right configurations, you would also build a kind of, in another space, a kind of a metaphysical space. And I think they had some pretty airy-fairy spiritual ideas. But later on, that idea stayed with me, this idea that if you build in a space with certain ideas and ways of building, that there would be another space that building would also appear. So, that there was this notion of two levels, and it's kind of mirrored by the idea that there's a visible world that we all of us see all of the time, whether it's presented on the media or the face of corporations. And then there's what goes on behind the scenes, which nobody sees. So there was always this sense of duality during that time. And then later on, I was doing some postgraduate research on the Western Downs with kids writing about the future of their towns. Beautiful, beautiful research. I formed such strong bonds with those kids. They were writing speculative fiction about the future, and I was basically taking them through it and working with me on Comes the Night in the earlier stages. So a lot of their ideas and thoughts came into the books. They're country towns. People tend to be more conservative, and kids are very protected. They care a lot about, they're very aware of the safety of living in the country as opposed to the city. And all of these dialogues and their thoughts, sometimes they're much younger and more naive in their attitudes, also beautiful and thoughtful, and they all drive tractors and geld sheep or something. But so they do some really serious adult things, but they also have this kind of intellectual naivety, which is both beautiful, but also kind of limited as well. So all of these thoughts were going into the book, into the ideas around Canberra and what it would be like to have a city that was so safe and protected.
Living inside this Canberra dome that you've imagined, we meet Will Helloran. Will is on a willful hunt, a gift from his Uncle Adam. Uncle Adam seems like just the kind of uncle everybody would like to have. What is the willful hunt, and what part does Uncle Adam play in Will's life and in this story?
You said it perfectly. Everybody wants this perfect adult who's going to be a mentor, but exciting and glamorous and all the rest of it. And so he was every teenager's ideal of a mentor that I wanted and didn't have. Most of us don't. But we do have people we like and who are kind to us. So he's that person. And he invented this game for Will. He's a game designer. He's designed a game which is not a computer game, although that's what he designs for Will, to distract him from the fact that his parents are split up. And the game is simply a hunt for things that Will has to find. He's given a time frame, and if he finds the clues, each clue will lead him to the next clue. And when he gets to the end of the game, he will find his uncle waiting. And sometimes there's an incredible gift, and the kite in the story is one of those things that comes to him in this way. The real true purpose of the game is for Will to be able to talk about anything he wants without any barriers, no sense of being an adult or child. Will can ask his uncle anything after those hunts, and he asks about his parents, and he asks questions about girls. And so there's this access to information from someone he really loves and trusts. But the game has a purpose which Will doesn't know about. And it's training him for something that he will have to face in the future. And as the story unfolds, he comes to realize what the game was really training him for. And at some point, he has to begin to use his training and understand what that training means in the realm that he now has to deal with, the things he has to deal with that are part of the story arc. I don't want to give away too much.
Of course not. It's really interesting, though, that although this is a work of fantasy fiction, or speculative fiction, however you want to describe it, there are actually real-world problems, as you've alluded to, that Will has to deal with. A whole raft of tensions that are building in his life. How does Will begin to come to terms with all these tensions in his life?
Well, he is 16, but I'd say his real age is about 14. He's mentally younger, and he is really younger. He's really intelligent, but he's naive in many ways. And at first, he's quite angry at his mother, who seems rather cold to him. He loves his father, but his father is flawed and he recognises it, but he really does love him. He wants to stay with him. With all the flaws, he prefers the life he lives with his father to his mother, who is a minister's assistant and lives this kind of glamorous life, which he sees her more on television than he sees her anywhere else, on government bulletins. and he has a friend he really cares about and he's very close to. He's having to make those kinds of decisions young people make at a certain point in their studying career, where he's going to have to make choices about what he needs to do in the future. So all of these things are around him, and he's very much concerned with those things. He feels safe. He doesn't understand some of the political tensions going on in the world, and he sees the ambiguities, but he doesn't understand them. The memories of his uncle helps him to process some of it, but really it's love and care for people that actually pushes him to the next level. And I think the great growth for Will is through the people around him. I think sometimes we're much braver and much wiser on behalf and much fiercer on behalf of other people than we are for ourselves. And it's easier to see outside of ourselves problems than it is the ones inside. He doesn't see his own limitations, but as the story unfolds, caring for people around him, and he has a big heart, helps him to see through some of the things. And as he begins to see through them, he starts to question not only the things in his own life, but in a larger arena as well. So I think he's going through that arc of awakening when you appreciate safety, but at the first moment he needs to do something which pushes him up against all of the safeties. He realizes safety is like a fence that also keeps you in.
You mentioned friends and friendship and love. And Will's not alone in facing all of these challenges. Enda is a very close friend, and Enda has a twin, Magda, an intelligence operative. They are both known as XDs. What is an XD, and what part do they play in Will's life and in the story?
There was a program in the world that I'm imagining. There was a program called the XD program, and it was an attempt to help children become brighter, and it was an attempt to extend neurodiverse qualities. We all have them. I think we're all on a spectrum, and we do move along that spectrum sometimes, even in our lives. But it was an attempt to increase the neurodiverse aspects, because there's also often a very high intelligence or an ability with technology, which was very important. But the XD program, in extending these abilities to anyone who was given the drug, the children who were born from women who'd taken the drug, also have very, very strong emotions. They're not meant to be neurodiverse. I've had a couple of people say, oh, they're obviously neurodiverse. They're not meant to be representing neurodiverse people. They're meant to be examining certain traits in human beings. What would happen if we exaggerate them? I think we're trying to do that in many ways. We're modifying our behaviour, the behaviour of our children. They're being modified by drugs in order to be more acceptable, to fit in better. And that is happening. It happens trying to quell traits that are deemed as unsociable. And how far do you take that? In other cultures and other times, particularly Indigenous cultures, people who were outside the regular realm of things, they were seen as being special in the best sense of the word, as in that they had capacities and ways of seeing the world that not all of us have. And a society is more interesting if it can incorporate all of that diversity rather than shut it down. So it's a way of kind of examining, if you do try to shut down this stuff, what will happen, but also how that brightness has its own arc that will escape many of these protections as well. So, and it's also stretching Will to deal with Magda's extreme character. And of course, Enda's his really good friend, and she's very bright and very sharp and extended too, but not to the point where she might be quenched, which is what Magda might face.
Comes the Night is told in two sections. We might even say in two dimensions: the waking world and the dreamscape. For Will, it's dreams and nightmares that form a kind of gateway to an alternative dimension, and a particular recurring dream, which we heard in our reading. What world does this dreamscape open up for Will?
The dreamscape is examining what happens if we erode our dreams, what happens if our dreams are under siege in some ways, because if people are trying to frighten a populace, which goes on a lot in political circles, your dreams are full of nightmares that are being fed to them. So in a way, I was looking at that. But for Will, dreams represented a dreamscape which is formed by people's dreams when they sleep. So if you and I slept because we've talked today, our dream spaces might form together on the dreamscape. So it's this shifty space which forms and reforms. And Will discovers he has the ability to move through that dreamscape, so that for him is a platform he can act on, where he's not just simply a limited boy of 16. He can do other things. And he sometimes looks at what can I do in the real world? If I can do this on the dreamscape, but I'm sometimes in the real world and I have to act there, what can I do? And this is a constant tension for me as a writer who writes about fantasy worlds or science fiction worlds. It is a way to examine real world problems, as you were saying at the outset. But at the same time, if I can solve a problem in an imaginary world with an imaginary solution, the problem does not solve the solutions in the real world. So in everything that I've ever written, there's this attempt to drag it back to the real world and somehow find solutions that are real in the real world as well, so that you're not just solving things with a unicorn flying around in another world, but you're dealing with them on a realistic level, because those are the things I really care about too. The questions underpinning my books are always real world questions that I'm trying to think my way through and engage ideas, not ever to come up with, solutions or truth with a capital T, but glimpses of possibilities and ideas that might help. And hope. I'm always looking for hope. For me, every book is a journey towards hope somehow.
And that's one of the great themes of this book too, is the power of the imagination alongside the technology, the conspiracy theories, the life tracks, which arise in this book, and the controlled environment, the waking world and the dreamscape, sits this exploration of the power of the imagination.
Yeah, love and imagination, I think, are the two things that will keep us going forward as a human species. When so many aspects of our human nature are it's so strange. Like right from the beginning, when I wrote my first book when I was 14, and right from the beginning, I was writing about the extremes of human behavior and trying to understand how a species that can produce art and self-sacrifice for someone else, who can be beautiful and kind and amazing, at the other end can be so cruel and vile and selfish and unthinkably monstrous. How are we capable of these extremes? And everybody starts out as a child who doesn't have that in them. But somehow, bit by bit, I think by the choices we make, we move in various directions. And as a writer, I'm always interested in the moments in which we choose to act that are formative for us. You as a child, me as a child, things happen to us that really made us the person we are now, whether it be the person who behaves in a cowardly way in a moment they need to be brave, or is capable of extraordinary bravery in that moment. And again, it's a spectrum. We don't often face those extremes, but sometimes we do.
Comes to night, it's a very thought-provoking book too, and there's actually a political dimension to the story, and it's very skillfully woven into the speculative fiction, the fantasy, the dystopian aspects of the story. I wondered what you might be trying to prompt in your readers.
I suppose just to notice, to pay attention, because Will accepts, like everybody, those government bulletins, which supposedly getting rid of the media has allowed the community to just have politicians talk directly. Because sometimes you watch those question times and you watch a person being interviewed and they skillfully evade answering any questions. And, it's maddening to watch, because they're evading it, they know they're evading it, and they're totally unashamed about it. And so some people would say, well, what about if we just got rid of them and we had politicians talking directly to the people? That's all very well, but then the journalistic mandate is to speak truth to power or ask questions. So those questions are not being asked. Will's uncle has said to him at some point, it's just information. You then have to process it. And I think that's what, if anything, I'm trying to think my way through is, we need to look at why people are doing the things that they do, not just what politicians are saying, but why they might be saying it, what is behind it, who is behind it sometimes, and to be alert. There's truth out there. And I think not just one truth is what we need. I think many truths are what we need. And then we have to make our own mind up. And if you're educated and you're taught to think and analyse, I think we can work out the truth of many things. So I suppose, if anything, I'm trying to fight my way through that kind of cloud of whatever it is that politicians are doing. I mean, I think there's a lot of career politicianing going on. And I don't think that's good for the community on any side. I don't think, whatever platform you're on, politically, I don't think career politicianing is serving us as a community. And in many ways, it's having a go at that as well. I feel like it should be a public service. I wish that we would all be taking part in it. I wish it would change much more easily and fluidly. I wish it were not so monetized. I wish it were not so powerful. Sometimes I'm troubled by the idea of parties because, people stay within their bubble rather than communicating. And that idea of bubbles, and said at the outset something about the Canberra bubble. And I think I'm concerned about how we're atomized as a culture, and politicians are in one bubble and art communities in another bubble, and how to get through those bubbles and actually talk to one another. That's a thing that I think needs to be addressed. And I guess what I'm saying is, when I'm writing, I'm just streaming all of the things about the world that concern me, that I know, trying to take them very realistically into the future to see where I think it would go.
Isobelle, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you, and thanks so much for joining me on the Good Reading Podcast.
Thank you.
I've been talking to Isobelle Carmody about her new novel, Comes the Night. It's published by Allen & Unwin, and you can find it at goodreadingmagazine.com.au. My name's Greg Dobbs, and thanks for listening. This Good Reading Podcast was brought to you by Book People Gift Cards. Share the joy of reading with a Book People gift card. To find out more, visit bookpeoplegiftcards.org.au.